If you're familiar with my YouTube channel, you know that I am a massive horror fan when it comes to movies, to games, and all types of entertainment. I absolutely love the horror genre. Well, that being said, guys, we've talked a lot about Dead Space and this franchise, past, present, and what could be the very well the future of it. And I know many of you have, request Dead Space content. I absolutely, like I said, love Dead Space. It's one of my favorite horror games of all time. So I wanted to go out and talk in this segment of the show about why Dead Space 4 was canceled, which would have been the continuation of this franchise. So let's talk about it. So look, guys, you can check out all of my Dead Space content in, obviously on the YouTube channel. We've made a lot of Dead Space content, lots of Dead Space 4 content. And, so obviously many of us who are fans of this franchise want to know, is there going to be a continuation at some point or another in the future? And the easy, and quick answer is no, most likely not, guys. However, you can never say never when we talk about gaming, when we talk about all types of entertainment. You can never say never, right? So why was Dead Space 4 canceled? That's the first question that we have to answer in order to talk about, okay, are we going to get a continuation at some point or another? So the reasoning for Dead Space 4 and the demise of this franchise at this point is, to be honest, guys, it's quite simple. The first part of it is that up to this point, we've had 3 Dead Space titles, a trilogy, you could somewhat call it. The first 2 games were absolutely incredible in my personal opinion. I think it's pretty universally known and acknowledged that the Dead Space 1 and Dead Space 2 are fantastic games, guys. Absolutely terrifying, unnerving, and very action-packed, exciting, stories. And with that, guys, with any peak that you get in any type of franchise, any franchise out there, there is going to come a point where there's going to be controversy, adversity. There's going to be valleys from, different points. As you peak, there's going to be times where you hit valleys as well. And none other than Dead Space 3 was certainly that for, the franchise, for us as a fan base. There were certainly some that really enjoyed Dead Space 3, but many of us, most of us, did not appreciate or really enjoy Dead Space 3. So what happened with that game? Well, first of all, guys, Dead Space 3 was a different kind of take on Dead Space. It was this direction that EA was trying to go in, and even Visceral Games, you got to kind of hold them accountable as well. The developers, of course, of the Dead Space franchise. They have to be held accountable for the demise of the franchise by, essentially doing exactly what, the opposite of what made Dead Space so special. And that is a horror, horror over action. It is, this concept where, of course, there's action within the first 2 Dead Space games, but the horror elements outweigh that of the action elements. Whereas in Dead Space 3, it was flip-flopped. It was action elements over that of horror elements. And that's where there was a disconnect, not only with, the fan base, but even when we look at the sales of the game, when we look at the critical reception of the game, you can see that there is this disconnect. And so Dead Space 3 was obviously the kind of the valley that we reached in in this franchise in particular. EA saw that and they looked at, Dead Space as a whole. And so essentially they shut down Visceral Games after Dead Space 3. When there was talk that, they were going to make a Dead Space 4, they decided against it and they shut down Visceral Games. The other part of Dead Space 3, though, that, has to be taken into account here is the fact of the matter is, guys, is that they lacked the evolution of the franchise. It took 3 games to get co-op, to get, other game modes outside of the single player story. And this is what I preach on the YouTube channel all the time, that these AAA titles, when they come out from these developers, major developers, they have to be a full package in today's gaming landscape, in my personal opinion. When you pay $60, you want to have obviously a great visceral story, but you also are going to want to have things to do outside of the campaign after you're done beating the campaign. And I know there's some games that that are out there that only have, single player stories. God of War is an example, and it got, sold very well. And there's a number of games out there. But overall, I believe that it's very important to have a full package where you've got campaign, multiplayer, and co-op modes. And, even games like, for example, God of War, as I brought that up, it's a single player story, but after you're done beating it a couple of times, you're going to most likely move on to other games, which is what you usually do. But if God of War had multiplayer as well as co-op, then you might stay a lot longer to play the multiplayer elements, to play the co-op elements. With Dead Space, guys, I feel that it was a little bit too little too late. They add co-op, but no multiplayer. I think that Dead Space had a real opportunity to be kind of like Gears of War with adding like a horde mode where you play co-op and you go up against waves and waves of necromorphs and things of that nature. I think something of that concept could have been really great for a game like Dead Space, and they just never ended up doing that. And obviously they added co-op, but the fan base was already very, it was very divisive, obviously, because a lot of people wanted it to be more of a horror game, of course, because that's what it started as. And this just comes to show, guys, when these franchises decide to try to evolve and change what they are, sometimes it works, but most of the time it doesn't work, and it did not work for Dead Space. So where does that leave us, guys, now with Dead Space 4? So EA still controls what happens here with the Dead Space franchise. They own the IP. So there's a couple of things that could happen. Number one, they very well might sell the IP. We don't see that happen very often. We know Bethesda got bought out by, of course, Xbox and Microsoft, but it's not usually typical that Microsoft would buy just one IP from Bethesda. They decided to buy the entire thing. So I would have to say, guys, that realistically, it feels like EA would have to be bought out by someone to hold all of these different IPs. Now, there's certainly a possibility that they would sell Dead Space and a couple other of their IPs to, the highest bidder, but it doesn't seem very likely, at least at this point in time. I'll be sure to give you guys more information if that ends up happening at some point or another, and if there's the rumblings that that's going to happen. Number two, though, is maybe they bring it back. Now, theoretically, guys, this is probably the most likely scenario. Now, I don't think that they're just going to bring it back by saying, here's Dead Space 4. What they most likely would do, and we see this with a lot of other games out there, they would come out with remakes, or they would come out with a, remastered trilogy, something of that nature. We see with like Prince of Persia, that's going to be getting a Sands of Time remake. We see a lot of remakes. Resident Evil's getting a lot of remakes. So to me, I think the best move forward for EA is to remaster or kind of remake the first 3 games, or at least the first 2, and see if there's still a massive fan base there, or at least a decent fan base there for Dead Space, and then they can go from there and make a continuation at some point, greenlight it at some other point or another. Because if they build the hype once again by making a remake, then they can kind of go into the full-blown production of a Dead Space 4. And I think it makes total sense to do that. I don't think that Dead Space 4, if they were to just greenlight that and bring it out, I don't necessarily think it would do extremely well right off the bat. I feel like they need to kind of build this thing up because it's been a number of years since Dead Space 3. And, I think that needs to be a full package. As I said, multiplayer, co-op, of course, campaign. Keep it grounded though in what the, as a horror game over, an action game. Obviously having action elements is what Dead Space is, but having the horror elements over the action elements. We also know, guys, that the Callisto Protocol is coming out. Glenn Schofield, who was one of the creators of the original Dead Space, is coming out with this new title, guys, the Callisto Protocol. And a lot of people are saying that this is something that is within the Dead Space universe. It's obviously been confirmed that it is actually within the PUBG universe, which is very interesting. Kind of reminds me of Rainbow Six and what they're doing. Obviously, you have Rainbow Six Siege, but they also created Rainbow Six Quarantine. Kind of reminds me a little bit of that. So you got, obviously the Callisto Protocol in the PUBG universe. That'll be really interesting, but certainly has some kudos, in my opinion, from the trailers and such to Dead Space. And hopefully, guys, we get a Dead Space title. But in the meantime, there are more and more horror titles coming out, guys, that seem to be really generating a lot of buzz. I mean, you can talk about the stuff that's up up and coming soon, Resident Evil Village and such, all the way to games like the Callisto Protocol. Dead Space, guys, was a fantastic game. I absolutely love it, guys. At this point, I believe it is, though, in a limbo state, potentially a state of no return. You can never say never, though, like I said. And really, I believe that we as a community have to be the ones coming together to try to voice our opinion to the developers, that being EA and such, to try to get these games made. If there's enough of us, they might at least, you know, greenlight a remake or a remaster of the first Dead Space with some added content and such. And then they could see, okay, how many people bought copies and things of that nature, and then go from there. It'll be really interesting to say the least, guys, because I think there still is a relatively large fan base behind the Dead Space franchise. But let me know, guys, what do you guys really thought, you know, kind of happened here with the Dead Space franchise, and do you think we'll ever get a Dead Space 4? Let me know in the comment section down below, and for more Dead Space 4 content and videos, stay here with Zero TV.